nobody in that stadium expected what they were about to witness. Because a 21-year-old from the Philippines had just walked onto the court carrying the weight of an entire nation and somehow made it look effortless. This is the story of how Alex turned the Cincinnati Open into her own personal coronation, and why the people who run women's tennis are starting to realize they have never seen anything quite like this before. Picture the scene: the Lindner Family Tennis Center, home to a tournament worth over $7 million, one of the most prestigious stops on the entire WTA calendar, and yet for a few hours, it stopped feeling like Ohio at all. It felt like Manila had packed its bags and flown halfway across the world just to watch one young woman play tennis. Flags everywhere. Chants that would not stop. A wall of noise so relentless that longtime tennis journalists said they had genuinely never heard anything like it at a regular tour event. And standing in the middle of all that emotion was Alex, about to face a battle-tested veteran who had already beaten her twice before. This was not going to be easy, and everyone in that crowd knew it. But let's rewind for a second, because to understand why this match mattered so much, you need to understand where Alex was coming from just days earlier. She had walked off the court in Toronto having reached the round of 16 before running into Belinda Bencic, a tough loss but hardly a disaster, especially considering the run that preceded it. Before that heartbreak, Alex had done something no one saw coming. She had captured her very first WTA title in Washington, taking down the likes of world number 3 Jessica Pegula along the way, and in doing so she stitched together a 7-match winning streak that turned heads across the entire sport. That kind of stretch takes a toll on the body and the mind, so after Toronto she did what any smart competitor would do. She stepped away from the sport entirely for a couple of days. Not to train harder, not to analyze film, but to just be a normal 21-year-old for a moment. She wanted a haircut. She wanted her nails done. She wanted a few days where tennis was not the only thing occupying her thoughts. It sounds almost mundane, but that kind of self-care is exactly what separates athletes who burn out from athletes who sustain excellence over months and years. And when she landed in Cincinnati, it was clear the break had done its job, because waiting for her was something extraordinary. The city itself does not have a massive Filipino population, somewhere in the range of 1,000 to 2,000 people according to most estimates, a modest number compared to some other American cities. But zoom out to the state level and you find nearly 17,000 Filipino Americans calling Ohio home, and it turned out an enormous chunk of them were willing to make the drive to Mason just to be part of this moment. The practice courts alone were surrounded by supporters waving Philippine flags before she had even played a competitive point. Social media was already flooded with clips of the welcome she received, the kind of reception usually reserved for athletes competing in their actual home country, not a tour stop in the American Midwest. This tournament represented a genuine milestone for her career too. For the very first time, Alex arrived at a WTA 1000 event as the 17th seed, the highest seeding she had ever carried into one of these massive tournaments. That seeding came with a benefit she had never experienced before at this level, a bye straight into the second round. Think about what that actually means. Not long ago, this was a player who had to grind her way through qualifying rounds just to earn a spot in the main draw, or hope tournament organizers would throw her a wild card out of generosity. Now the sport was handing her byes because her ranking demanded that kind of respect. That is not a small shift. That is a player who has fundamentally changed her status within the tour. Her opponent would be determined by another match entirely, a showdown between Elena Gabriela Rus of Romania and Magda Linette of Poland, a 34-year-old veteran who had already caused chaos in the tournament by knocking out a 6-time Grand Slam champion in the very first round. When the dust settled, it was Lynette who advanced, setting up a rematch that Alex had circled in her mind long before she ever stepped onto Ohio soil. Their history together was complicated, a 2-2 record heading into Cincinnati, evenly split in the most literal sense possible. Lynette had won their first 2 meetings, back in Abu Dhabi and then again in Nottingham, both times exposing weaknesses in a younger, less experienced version of Alex, but something had changed since then. Alex answered back, first in Auckland at the ASB Classic, then again in Miami, proving that whatever Lynette had figured out about her game the first 2 times around, she had since solved. Still, none of those previous meetings carried the weight of this one. This was not some smaller event where the stakes felt manageable. This was a WTA 1000 tournament, one of the biggest tiers in the sport outside the 4 Grand Slams. and everyone watching understood that a win here would mean something completely different than a win in Auckland or Miami ever could. Before the match, reporters caught up with Alex and asked about the wave of Filipino support that had already engulfed the tournament. She smiled and told them the fans would get their chance to see her soon enough, a lighthearted deflection that masked just how seriously she was taking the challenge ahead. Because make no mistake, beneath that easy confidence, she knew exactly what kind of opponent she was walking into. Lynette had not backed into this second round matchup. She had fought for it, grinding through a brutal 3-set battle against Ruse, the very same player who had once eliminated Alex in US Open qualifying a couple of years earlier. That win over Ruse told you everything you needed to know about Lynette's mental toughness heading into this clash. She was not going to fold under pressure. If anything, she thrived in exactly these kinds of extended, grueling contests. And that reputation was well earned. Over more than a decade on tour, Lynette had built a career on frustrating younger, more explosive players by refusing to give them anything easy. She extended rallies. She made opponents hit one more shot than they wanted to. She turned tennis matches into wars of attrition, and plenty of promising young talents had walked off the court against her feeling like they had just survived something rather than won it. Alex remembered exactly what that felt like from their first meeting years earlier, when Lynette had simply outlasted her, outcompeted her, and shown a level of experience that Alex at the time simply did not possess yet. But this was a different version of Alex walking onto the court now. This was a player fresh off her maiden tour title. A player who had climbed all the way to a career high ranking inside the top 20. A player with 7 straight match wins under her belt heading into that stretch in Toronto. And most importantly, this was a player who now had an army behind her, thousands of voices ready to lift her up the second things got difficult. When the match finally began, it was obvious from the opening exchanges that neither player intended to give an inch. Lynette held her opening service game cleanly, immediately targeting the backhand side, clearly having done her homework and looking to expose any lingering weaknesses from their previous encounters. The tension in the air was thick. Both competitors were feeling each other out, searching for cracks, testing patterns, waiting for the moment to strike. And then, in the fourth game, that moment arrived. Alex found a rhythm that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. A thunderous forehand that landed right on the line, followed by a perfectly placed backhand that sent Lynette scrambling. Suddenly, the veteran who had looked so composed moments earlier found herself on her heels, forced into defense rather than dictation. The break came, and when it did, the eruption from the crowd was immediate and deafening. You could see it change something in Alex, that little fist pump, the sudden lift in her shoulders, the visible jolt of confidence that comes from knowing thousands of people just roared because of something you did. From that point through the rest of the opening set, both players traded holds, refusing to give away a single cheap point, but the numbers told the real story of who was in control. Alex was landing well over 60% of her first serves, and when those serves found the box, she was winning nearly 72% of the resulting points. That kind of efficiency on serve is exactly what lets a player stay composed during long, tense rallies because you are never playing from behind in the point. Then in the 8th game, the opportunity Alex had been waiting for arrived. Only her second breakpoint chance of the entire set, and she converted it without hesitation, riding that momentum straight through to close out the opening set by a score of 6-3. It felt for a moment like the match might slip away from Lynette entirely. But veterans do not fold that easily, and Lynette proved exactly why she had survived on tour for over a decade. She raised her level dramatically in the second set, suddenly finding nearly 73% success on her first serve points. Applying relentless pressure whenever Alex was forced to return. The rallies got shorter, the pace increased, and before long, Alex found herself trailing 4-5, staring directly at the possibility of the match sliding into a decisive third set. This, right here, was the moment that would define everything. Not the opening set win, not the crowd noise, not the storylines about heritage and community. This exact stretch of tennis, with a nation of supporters watching and a genuine threat of losing control of the match, would reveal what kind of competitor Alex truly was. And instead of panicking, instead of trying to force winners she did not have, she did something much smarter. She leaned into patience. She trusted her depth, her positioning, her ability to simply outlast her opponent in longer exchanges rather than trying to end points early. Even when her first serve abandoned her in stretches, she found a way to win an astonishing 76% of her second serve points. refusing to let Lynette dictate the terms of engagement even when the numbers on paper suggested she should have been vulnerable. She held that service game, forcing the set into a tiebreak, and that is when the real separation happened. In the breaker, Alex's focus sharpened into something almost surgical. She attacked Lynette's second serve relentlessly, took control early in nearly every point, and surged out to a commanding lead that Lynette simply could not claw back from. The tiebreak finished 7 points to 2, and with it, the match was over. Final score 6 games to 3, then 7 games to 6 with that dominant tiebreak finish. The entire contest wrapped up in just under 2 hours, and there was remarkably little drama in that final stretch, a sign of just how thoroughly Alex had seized control when it mattered most. Think about what she had just accomplished. A player who had beaten her twice before, a seasoned professional who had just knocked out a 6-time Grand Slam champion days earlier. And Alex had taken her down in straight sets on one of the biggest stages available outside the majors themselves. But if the win itself was impressive, what happened after the final point was, in its own way, even more remarkable. As Alex walked off that court, the noise did not fade. If anything, it intensified. This was the same wall of sound that had followed her through Toronto weeks earlier, the same roar that had echoed through the stadium in Washington when she claimed that first title. It had become something like a soundtrack to her entire summer, this specific frequency of celebration that seemed to travel with her from city to city, tournament to tournament. Philippine flags draped over railings throughout the stands, custom shirts on fans who had clearly planned this trip well in advance, children holding up handmade signs with messages of belief and pride. Veteran journalists who cover this sport for a living were comparing the atmosphere to something you would expect at a Grand Slam final, not a second-round match at a midsummer hardcourt event. And here is what makes it even more remarkable. Cincinnati's Filipino population is genuinely small compared to plenty of other American cities. Yet somehow this community had managed to generate an atmosphere that rivaled tournaments in cities with far larger diaspora populations. People made the drive from all over Ohio, pulling from that broader pool of nearly 17,000 Filipino Americans across the state, refusing to let geography be the reason they missed watching history unfold in person. The players around her were noticing too, and not in some vague, dismissive way. Coco Gauff, the reigning US Open champion and one of the most recognizable faces in the entire sport, had already spoken publicly about the impact Alex was having, praising the way she was bringing entirely new audiences into tennis, and calling her a genuine role model for people trying to find their way into the sport. Jessica Pegula, the very player Alex had defeated in that Washington final, went even further, directly addressing the Filipino fans who kept showing up tournament after tournament, thanking them for the energy they brought and acknowledging how much that kind of grassroots passion helps grow the sport globally. When athletes at that level start publicly acknowledging what is happening around your matches, that tells you this is no longer just a nice story. This is a genuine cultural moment unfolding in real time. After the match, speaking directly to the crowd that had shown up in such staggering numbers, Alex switched into Tagalog, thanking her fellow Filipinos for their unwavering support, expressing just how much it meant to see this level of love from her community, and how proud she felt carrying that identity onto every court she stepped onto. It was not a rehearsed soundbite, it was raw, genuine gratitude, the kind that only comes from someone who understands exactly what these people sacrifice, time, money, long drives, just to be present for this. That connection, that mutual exchange of energy between player and community is really what people mean when they talk about the Alex effect. It was never just about selling tickets or filling seats. It was about transforming ordinary tour stops into something closer to a cultural celebration, turning strangers sitting next to each other in the stands into something resembling family for a few hours, and turning one young athlete from the Philippines into a symbol that an entire diaspora could rally around. So now the obvious question hanging over everyone in that stadium, and honestly everyone following the sport closely, becomes this: what does any of this mean heading into the US Open? Because make no mistake, Cincinnati, as prestigious as it is, functions as the final major tune-up before tennis descends on Flushing Meadows for the last Grand Slam of the season. The tournament in Ohio runs through the middle of August, and Alex entering as the 17th seed with a first-round bye already represents the highest standing she has ever carried into a WTA 1000 event. But everyone in her camp understands that Cincinnati was always just the appetizer. The real target, the tournament that actually matters most, starts at the end of August and stretches into mid-September in New York. Last year, Alex made history by becoming the first Filipino tennis player ever to win a Grand Slam match during the sport's modern open era, a milestone that alone would define most careers. This year, she does not arrive as some feel-good underdog story anymore. She arrives as a legitimate top 20 player, someone opponents now have to genuinely prepare for, someone with a target squarely on her back. And yet, if you listen to how she talks about the tournament, there is a refreshing lack of pressure in her own mind. She has been open about not fixating on some specific round she needs to reach, choosing instead to approach every tournament one match at a time, one round at a time. That kind of grounded mentality has become the foundation of her entire rise, allowing her to absorb pressure from bigger moments without letting it consume her game. People close to her program have echoed similar sentiments about the importance of rest heading into these massive stretches. After that tough exit in Toronto, sources close to the Philippine Tennis Federation noted that fatigue had clearly caught up with her following such a demanding run through Washington, and expressed hope that the recovery time before Cincinnati and the US Open would leave her fresh for the biggest moments still ahead. But there is also a belief that her run through Wimbledon earlier in the season, where she defeated the defending champion, continues to fuel a growing sense of self-belief that shows up in how she competes when matches get tight. When a player genuinely believes she belongs on these stages, that confidence becomes visible in the way she handles pressure points. The way she refuses to fold when a match could easily slip away, exactly like what happened against Lynette in that second set. Her commitment to the sport and to the platform she has built extends beyond just competing for herself too. Later in August, she is scheduled to step onto Arthur Ashe Stadium for an exhibition match during Fan Week, sharing the court with other rising stars in the sport, and a portion of proceeds from that event will go towards supporting youth tennis and education programs in communities that need it most. That says something about how she views her own rise, not just as a personal achievement, but as an opportunity to open doors for the next generation coming up behind her. In her own words, she has described feeling like she has come far, but still has plenty of distance left to travel, a mindset that reveals someone who is nowhere near satisfied with what she has already accomplished. And the road ahead genuinely is daunting. The 2026 US Open field is absolutely loaded with the biggest names in the sport, dominant world number ones, Grand Slam champions, and elite competitors all standing between Alex and any deep run in New York. This will almost certainly be the toughest draw of her career so far. But she carries something into that tournament that very few of her competitors can claim, a community that will travel wherever she plays, a nation back home that will be watching every single point regardless of the hour, a movement that has already fundamentally changed the atmosphere around women's tennis wherever she competes. She has spoken about how honored she feels representing her country, how grateful she is for the recognition and love pouring in from Filipino fans everywhere, and how much she hopes to inspire the next wave of Filipino athletes to believe they belong on the biggest stages in the world.